Hello, I'm Dave Hobbs for Delphi, and welcome to this Delphi Auto Parts Cast. Today we're going to be talking about diesel fuel injectors, the evolution of the injectors real quick, in case you're a gas guy that works a little bit on diesels, but getting into a much deeper aspect of heavy-duty diesel injection. We've got a subject matter expert. We've got Service Operations Manager for the Delphi Diesel Aftermarket Division, Paul Mydlarz. Paul, thanks for joining the podcast today. I just want to ask you real quick for those that just want to pull up the speed on diesel injection in general. That's a few injectors laying here, and I just want to talk about each one of them briefly, and maybe you can kind of give me some tips on, about the vintage of vehicles we saw these on. This is chrome plated, obviously, and cut away for demonstration purposes. But this injector, obviously, there's the business end where the fuel comes out. This is a non-common rail. This is what's called the indirect injection, correct?
Well, that's a whole type injector used on typically a direct injected engine, but it's an older hydromechanical injector.
So there was no electronic controls. It simply got to a certain pressure and then boom, pop, it sprayed, right?
Yeah, with that, once the pressure builds up, it can overcome the spring force, the nozzle opens and it sprays into the combustion.
And we're talking technology that's decades old, correct?
Yeah, it's dating back, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s.
Great. All right. So kind of moving forward, we've got these HUEs, which is hydraulic electronic unitized injector. I think that's what the acronym spells out, right?
Correct.
So we have a combination of high pressure oil that would go through a common rail of oil. For example, like in a Ford Power Stroke would be an example, or any other, what brand of engine we talking?
Well, yeah, it's Ford Power Stroke or the Navistar.
Navistar,
would
right.
also have it.
So other applications out there, not just the pickup trucks that use
Right.
Navistar engine. So we control the flow of high pressure oil, and that's going to move a piston down, an intensifier piston, I think they call it,
piston.
and then that's going to cause the high pressure fuel then to spray out into the cylinder. Now, moving down the ladder, a little smaller injector. This is a common rail injector as well, and this is an electronic solenoid controlled injector.
Correct.
So that directly actuates the plunger or valve or whatever that's going to control the fuel flow directly into the cylinder on a diesel.
Yeah, there's a control valve that it operates.
And an application for this particular injector, what would we be talking about?
We'd see it on JCB applications, Doosan, Bobcat skid steer loaders.
Okay, all right. So
of others.
things out there doing construction work and out there in the farm fields and so forth. Now, coming up to a couple of unique looking injectors that have a big spring on them. Obviously, we're going to have a camshaft-driven rocker that's going to control these guys. This particular one is going to be a little different than this one. We're going to talk mostly about this one today in this podcast. This particular unit here, does not require a trim code. So you basically install it and you're ready to go.
It doesn't require a trim code file. However, there is a hexadecimal number trim code that you do key into the engine ECM.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So finally, moving up to this injector, we're going to have high pressure going to it. Not that high pressure going to it. We're going to have what you said, 5 bar maybe or something like that.
Yeah, you put a 5 bar.
Okay, so we're talking just a couple hundred psi, and this is going to be the electronic solenoid that's going to control that flow. And obviously, we're going to make the high pressure with the camshaft rocker arm actuator here, push it down the spring plunger. Let's talk about the trim code files that we're going to be focusing on today with this podcast. And I've got one right here with instructions on the back. And then here's like a little miniature CD-ROM. So tell us all about this.
Well, the C7, C13, and some of the C15 injectors that we sell require this trim code file to be uploaded into the engine ECM. So during our remanufacturing process of that injector, we develop a unique trim code to go along with it, and that tailors the injector so that when we put it in the ECM, we get the proper fuel trim. So each injector will have typically differences related to machining tolerances, friction between parts, magnetic forces. So one injector, even though the injectors pass our specs, they might be slightly different. So the trim code file takes that injector and tweaks it so that we get the same target delivery that we're looking for, so we get balanced delivery on the engine.
Okay. So if had some viewers that are maybe light duty diesel techs, This will be similar to what I've seen maybe with a Tech 2 on a Chevy with a Duramax, where you have to enter a code that's on the injector into your scan tool. We're doing this with a laptop, and we're doing this with this file. What's the hardware or the pass-through between, I would assume, the diagnostic connector on the vehicle or the piece of equipment with the diesel engine and the laptop?
Yeah, these typically have a 9-pin Deutz connector that plugs into the diagnostic port in the passenger compartment. That would then plug into a Nexic USB link vehicle interface. That interface then plugs into the laptop. And we have our laptop hooked to the internet, so we can use that to upload the trim code file.
All right, educate me a little bit, because I'm a light duty and mostly gas guy. This, you said a Nexus link, so that's the hardware. It's not necessarily what I would call like a J2534 SAE standard pass-through, but it's something like that then?
Yeah, so it just interfaces with the USB port on your laptop and allows us to send that data through the 9-pin diagnostic port.
Right, okay. So what's the connection to the laptop? A USB, I'm assuming? Okay,
yes.
so USB, and then we have the Deutsch pin on the other side. So basically, it's the heavy-duty truck version of a J2534 pass-through, but not necessarily to program everything on the vehicle, but mainly just for the injector trim codes. Does it do anything for diagnostics, allow you to look at any data parameters, PIDs, on your laptop?
Well, the Delphi trim code program that we've developed, that program will allow you to do some diagnostic work. It'll actually allow you to swap the injectors and the associated trim code files between cylinders to help you aid in diagnosing an issue on the engine.
Interesting.
So it's mainly swapping injectors or uploading trim code files.
So this swapping injectors, when would you do that? When you're looking for a source of a misfire? Is it this cylinder or that,
Exactly.
or this
You want to see if it
injector? Is
follows
it injector
the
related
injector.
or not?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what kind of work typically? This looks like you could take the rocker arm off. You could take a nut off or something like that, like I would on a gas engine with that has overhead valves.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to remove a rocker. I'm going to depressurize the system, and I'm going to obviously take the connector loose, and I would assume maybe a special tool, or maybe this pulls out by hand. But we're going to get the injector out. We're going to swap it to another cylinder, and we're going to see if the misfire follows the injector. But you're going to have to do the trim code again to do the swapping. So the software on your laptop and this interface you're talking about, the Nexus, that's going to do that job, right?
Right. You won't need a trim code file for swapping injectors because that's already uploaded to the engine ECM. It'll just take it from one cylinder and move it to
Just
another.
tells the ECM it's in a different spot.
Right.
Then. What kind of problems do you see if the trim codes are not? Let's just say a technician's like, hey, I've worked on a lot of older diesels and I'm not used to anything this fancy. It just looks like another injector. I'm going to pop an injector in, or a set of injectors in a Bobcat, and just see what happens. What can happen if you don't put the trim code in?
Well, you can end up with situations like low power, high power, rough idle. It'll affect your emissions, and in extreme cases, you could have engine damage.
Let's talk about that. What exactly happens in these extreme cases where you get engine damage? And what kind of engine damage? I'm going to assume a hole in the piston, maybe.
Well, you can get overheating near the top of the combustion chamber. It really depends on how much different it is from the trim code that it's looking for. Because you can have an injector that your original injector was maybe towards the higher limit, and that trim code file brought the fuel down. Now, if you put another injector in there with a different trim code file, that can either raise or lower the fuel delivery, and it also changes the timing as well, all throughout the engine speed range.
So, Paul, question about this Caterpillar injector. All right, so Caterpillar made this hardware. We made this spill valve solenoid. Now, we have a complete remanufacturing process on the entire injector, right here in Troy, Michigan.
Correct.
Where we go through the injector, new parts, things that are worn, improvements and so forth are taken care of, and it goes out the door. Let's talk about when they come back. You get some back, let's say a technician puts a set of these into a Bobcat, and these are bad. They pull them out and they send them back for warranty. What's your clue usually to tell you that they didn't do the trim code, read the directions, and get that Nexic interface and the laptop out and the USB cable and put the trim codes for this particular injector in the computer so it knows what hole it's in and how to flow. What's the telltale?
Well, in some cases, when we get injectors back and we analyze every injector we get back under warranty, and we find no fault found. So when we find no fault found, that's typically an indication that someone probably has not uploaded the trim.
Yeah, and the technician didn't pull them back out and send them back out to the distributor for warranty because they like the exercise. They obviously have a drivability problem. So a drivability problem is either something else or this injector is working great. It just didn't have the trim codes installed when the unit was installed in the engine.
Correct.
Excellent information. Now, speaking of getting a set of injectors, I know some of you may not know where to get a set of Delphi injectors for that heavy-duty diesel engine. So if you go to DelphiAutoParts.com, you go down to the bottom and you find the word diesel. Click on diesel and then click on not the one that says repair vehicle, but
it'll say injector pump repair.
Injector pump repair. That's where you click and you put in the country name, United States, or wherever you're listening from, and then the zip code, and then that'll pull up a list of authorized Delphi distributors that can, and some of them are rebuilding turbochargers and things. They're bigger businesses, but they can sell your diesel repair shop, your truck stop, whatever business you have. They will sell you a set of injectors, and if it's one of the ones that have the trim code, it'll have it in a box. Now, speaking of the trim codes, one last thing I wanted to ask you about that. This tool, this Nexiq, Nexiq, the little interface that goes between the Deutsch connector on the vehicle and the laptop, and then the USB from the laptop to this Nexiq, and then from there, a Deutsch connector into what I'll call the DLC of the vehicle. Does any other interface work?
You'll find that if you've got the original CAT ET vehicle interface, that'll work. In some other ones, it may work, but we validated the Nexiq USB link, so we know that one works.
Okay.
Sure.
And price-wise, it's very similar to a J2534 universal pass-through that we use in a lot of light-duty trucks and cars. So it's just a little box. It's $1,000, $1,500, whatever. It varies by the manufacturer, but that's the tool you need, and it also may have double duty to do some other diagnostic procedures on the vehicle. So it's not just quantity, it's timing as well.
Yes.
So that's something that, tell me about how when they build this injector, when we build this injector, how do they determine what that trim code's supposed to be?
Well, that's actually proprietary.
Okay,
so
that's the secret sauce, the secret formula, like in the soft drink.
That's
Okay.
the value added that we put into our injectors.
So would you say maybe competitors' injectors don't do a trim code and they're just kind of loosey-goosey as far as, or is that an industry standard these days with those engines?
Well, you can find other remanufacturers may not necessarily come up with a unique trim code. They may just put the original trim code back in there, even though the injector may not be reacting the way it originally did.
I see definitely a benefit then for a Delphi injector.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about injector damage. What can cause, replace an injector because it went bad, not just because it's time. It's not like a spark plug that wears out. So an injector that has an issue, I know we can have a misfire and hard starts and so forth, but what physically goes wrong in one of these type of injectors?
Well, it can be contamination. If you have improper maintenance procedures and you're not changing your fuel filters, or you're putting a fuel filter in there that isn't the correct micron rating, that can cause the injector to wear prematurely.
So how about fuel pressure? Can fuel pressure be a detriment? I know in some of the light-duty diesels, if you suffered from low fuel pressure, not only a drivability issue, but poor lubricity. You don't have enough fuel for the lubrication side of the injector, and the injector itself can go bad. And I think it's been more of what I've heard on some of the Power Strokes, which of course the Hueys, where it's an oil pressure issue. But in the case of these injectors, is pressure anything besides just drivability?
No, I'd say primarily drivability.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. And what kind of pressures, again, were we talking on this injector coming out the bottom end, the business end, to make that piston go down?
Something like that would probably be in the neighborhood of around 1800 bar. later injectors.
1,800 bars, so close to 30,000 psi.
Yeah.
Same as any other diesel engine today out there in the the Power Stroke world and the Duramax world. What else can you tell our listeners here to look out for on some of the diesel engine issues with injectors? Any advice, any words of wisdom? Because you've been doing this a little while.
Yeah, well, included with our injectors, we also include a box insert that gives you some additional tips to the installer to make sure that they don't have a repeat failure. Things to watch out for are finding out what the root cause of the failure is. So if a customer brings in an injector and you can see some obvious damage there, find out, did the customer actually fix the vehicle, so that way when they reinstall the new injector, they're not going to have a repeat failure. Also, make sure they're following proper engine installation procedures, because not installing the injector correctly is also going to cause problems.
What kind of things can you do wrong? I mean, what are the foolproof things and things that aren't so foolproof as far as installation physically? Anything physically? It almost looks like it'd be polarized, this unit especially, where it's only going to get in one direction. But besides that, I mean, how about the O-rings?
Yeah, definitely you want to make sure you lubricate them before you install the injector, and you want to make sure you protect the nozzle tip. So we tell people, don't remove it from the box until you're ready to install it in the engine. And because it's hermetically sealed in a plastic bag, so we know that there's no contaminants in the injector. So you want to keep it as clean as possible as you're installing.
Even though these are great big heavy duty engines, and this is a big heavy duty looking injector, you would say it's a fine instrument actually.
Yeah, we've got clearances of less than a micron in our products, and that's very fine clearances. So you've got to be really careful with it.
Yeah, a micron I happen to know would be smaller than even a human hair, much
Yes.
smaller than human hair. I forget what that specification is, maybe 30 microns or something like that. So this is definitely hair splitting stuff, no pun intended. What should you lubricate the O-rings with? Motor oil or silicone? What?
No, you can use motor oil when you install it.
Okay, all right. Anything that you want to do prior to starting the engine? Any kind of preparation?
That really depends on the vehicle and the application. For sure, you want to make sure you prime the system. With those injectors too, you'll have to adjust the rocker assembly. Make sure you have the right lash. Make sure it's torqued down correctly, because if it's not torqued down correctly, you can get combustion gas blow-by on the nozzle tip, and premature failure that way. So it's just following engine manufacturers' recommendations.
And on the blow-by, that would be a telltale that we could see when we remove the injector. There'd be signs of combustion gases.
Yeah, near the tip area, the sealing tip area.
Oh, down here.
Yes.
Okay, very good. And when you pull an injector out, you're a technician, working on heavy-duty diesels. You pull one of these guys out. What are some things I want to look at besides some signs of combustion gases, carbon around the tip here? Anything else I should look at? It gives me an idea what might have made it die.
Well, if you can see any evidence of metallic particles around the fuel gallery area, check the area where the engine rocker arm is activating it. Check the electrical connectors, make sure they're not damaged. Over-torquing that electrical connector when it's installed can cause it to fail prematurely as well.
How about the resistance of the winding?
There is a spec for that, and that would be in your engine manufacturer's information typically.
Okay, so you're looking for a shorter open, obviously right off the bat with an ohm meter, and then you want to see whatever the spec is for that manufacturer, 8 ohms, 12 ohms, whatever, 2 ohms. How about leakage? How about the winding itself leaking to ground?
Yeah, you could do a Megaohm check on it and check the insulation resistance.
Let's touch on that for a moment. When I hear the term Megaohm, being a car guy and being a hybrid fan myself, own a couple of hybrids over the years and done a lot of hybrid training, we've used the Megaohm meters, which a normal ohm meter can find gross shorts, things that are we wouldn't call tiny leakages. But in the world of hybrids, those orange cables, if they leak even a tiny amount of current, that a normal ohm meter could not find continuity, let's say between a ground and a winding terminal. The Megaohm meters, instead of putting a half an ohm or 2 ohms, I should say, ohm meters actually put voltage into a circuit, and they look to see what the voltage drop is of the circuit. Essentially, an ohm meter does a little low voltage, super low current voltage drop test, and it gives you the reading in ohms of resistance. A Megaohm meter puts out about 500 or 1,000 or whatever volts, low current, because it's just a little step-up transformer, and sees if we have up to gigaohms, not just megaohms, but gigaohms of resistance. So I'm familiar with the Megaohm meters, or Megers as they call them, or sometimes called high voltage leak testers. The Fluke series and some other brands out there. Bosch I know has one, and they do a great job on this, but I had no idea until talking with you getting ready for this podcast that we're using the Megers on some of these diesel injectors. So would you say your experience, you get out into the shops and you see the very high-end diesel specialty shops, some of the Delphi diesel shops, and then the average shop that is working on alongside the highway, maybe their fleet technicians working on a fleet of Bobcats for a rental company. Do you typically see a lot of Megers out there? I know I don't in my car environment that I go around to shops. What do you see?
No, actually, we don't as well, and that's a tool that I think a lot of people should have. Actually, Megaohm is a brand, but
okay.
But yeah, so there's as you mentioned, Fluke meters have insulation resistance testers as well. So, but no, I think it's a tool that definitely people should get.
Yeah, my experience, it's if you're going to buy a meter and you're going to work on hybrids or you're going to work on diesel injectors. As a matter of fact, I've seen even some applications in the Toyota service manual where they were showing that the Megaohm meter or high voltage leak tester, or Megger, if you go by that brand name, used on the tip of a spark plug. And we went from one lead on the tip of the spark plug, the other lead on the ground of the spark plug, and hit it with 1,000 volts and see if it showed any kind of leakage on the meter. That sure beats the little saltwater bath with the fine mist of water and torquing it up and drive and seeing if that spark leaks. But it's amazing to see how many different tools are out there that a lot of techs don't have that are not that expensive. I always encourage you, if you need a new meter, just go ahead and get a meter that does both amps, ohms, volts, and the Megaohm meter feature, the high voltage leak test, and you'll be using it on everything from diesels to hybrids to spark plugs. So it'd be a very versatile tool to consider. Beyond that, what kind of words of wisdom can you offer the techs as we kind of ramp up our podcast on the big injection and the trim codes?
Well, I think, again, it's very important that you install the trim code. And I think that there's a lot of people that don't, and they find out the hard way that they really needed to install it. So I think it really just comes down to following proper engine manufacturer's procedures, making sure that you've determined the root cause of the failure so you don't have a repeat failure. Be as clean as possible installing the injector, install it the correct way, and you're going to have a satisfied customer.
Well, Paul, before we let you go, I know you want to talk about the DelphiTrimco.com website. Tell us a little bit about what we can find on that site.
Well, I think the first thing you'd want to look for is the how-to guide. So I download that. It's a quick download PDF file. View that. There's also a YouTube video on how the whole process works. So I think you'll find it very easy to use once you've looked at the how-to guide and viewed the video.
And if you're a tech like me, it's like, well, the next best thing to actually being there and have someone like Paul over your shoulder showing you how to do it would be watch the video. So I really appreciate you putting that out there on the DelphiTrimco.com site. And we want to encourage you, if you have any questions or comments, please send us an email at delphi.podcast@delphi.com. And thanks for watching this podcast on behalf of Delphi and the Delphi Diesel Aftermarket Systems. I'm Dave Hobbs with Paul Mydlarz. Thanks for watching, and please catch our next podcast as soon as it's out.